With that, I think the stream should be up. It's me, Rami again, Ramirez. Personal friends call me Ogie. Down below is frogware.zil. Still do not have a website, put onto it yet, or at least I haven't set up the gateway. That's also a crypto domain, so if that ever, this videos get discovered, um, there's a way for people to send something to stuff. Hopefully I have an address for everything, even though I think Ethereum's gonna disappear. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm also a self-professed woo-woo expert of social interactions and the understanding of social environments, because I've put a lot of thought into it. Yeah. So, continuing part two from what I think I call the console wars. Console wars. Yeah, console wars. Yeah, I didn't finish talking about a lot of other things because I had one friend show up. He was already over there hanging out. Then I had another friend show up right after that. So I was like, if I could barely handle having one person here, kind of being like awkward, there's no way I can handle two. Um, so I think I got to talking about like consumerisms and how certain aspects of industry could be hidden from public view, or at least that was kind of the picture I wanted to build, was for people to understand that if just because you don't know about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. For example, I personally have a type of injury that I thought was never going to be solvable. A lot of people would tell me that I'm going to live with it for the rest of my life, and all like most professional help that you'll seek will offer you one particular kind of surgery. But if you weren't the research type, or if you weren't the type to look into alternatives or seek a different opinion from a different expert, you would have fell into the trap that most people fall into when they got my kind of injury. So there's this whole aspect of I'm not saying that PlayStation, Microsoft, or Nintendo were doing this deliberately. They were trying to offer the best product that they could. That's with the caveat, right? with the giant caveat, because people in the consumer realm don't understand that these companies were selling these consoles at a loss. That was primarily because what they were seeking to do was make money off of the sales of the CDs, not necessarily off the console itself. So a lot of the times back in the day, from like I'm not sure if PlayStation 2 fell into this, but there was that aspect of they had to first initially sell these at a loss, because how else would they get popular? How else could they get into the consumer's hands? Right? Because there is the discussion of entry level, but it's also at the same time, right, they started first. Later did it be right later after Gabe Newell. I think it was Gabe Newell that first developed the PowerShell. Not PowerShell, what is it called? It's a background infrastructure that basically DirectX. It basically allowed for video games to be run on Windows. Gabe Newell had a helping hand in that. If it wasn't for him, Doom would have never been the most successful PC game the world's ever known. That man has quite the interesting fingertips, if you ask me. They're everywhere. Um, so I do consider a lot of these things, because if I didn't get time to mention this, but I am blatantly aware that there is this kind of like balancing between making a profit off the console, making a profit off the CDs. Da 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 da. I can expand even further, but that's not the point. The point was that they put themselves in a market space where they now had a vested interest in not telling you that there is a different way of experiencing something. And you know, uh, I don't think PCs publicly were ever. I don't think PCs were ever publicly available, or at least not in the hands of a lot of consumers, until around like the end of AOL, and I think AOL kind of had a helping hand in that, since they were the primary. They got abused hard for free internet, is what I'm saying. So there were thresholds that needed to be met in order for these certain markers to progress forward. And graphics cards, I would say meaningful graphics cards didn't really. I don't know too much about that history. I wasn't necessarily a part of it from the early get go. I got into it around the 650 generation, I think. I don't even remember. Either way, but you only really had two leading industry people in that industry, and that was Nvidia and AMD. That was it. Um, I'm not too sure how the history of these two companies go, but I know AMD currently now is kind of viewed as the more favorable one when it comes down to chips, mainly because their CPUs pair well with NVIDIA GPUs. Um, a variety of other things could be said about their GPUs, and by GPUs I mean graphics processor unit. Basically, the thing that makes the graphics go good, um, which is kind of the only real thing that's a barrier of entry for any PC gaming. Um, that and the CPU takes a portion of that, but it depends on what game you're running. Most kids don't really care about the older games, so non CPU intensive. Um, right? There's that whole thing of I just said a bunch of shit, and do you even know what I just said? Probably not. But that's the point. The point is that there is a lack of understanding in industries. There's a lack of understanding in products, in consumerism. If it isn't branded, if it isn't put in your face, if it isn't being used by somebody meaningful, if it isn't being shown in such a hyper realistic way, by hyper realistic, good word to learn. Hyper realism or hyper realistic implies that you have a very specific way of viewing something that's of the real. And because it becomes a hyper realistic situation, is when your expectations over that situation are so in lockstep, or at least you have something that you want, it becomes hyper realistic, because now if these conditions aren't met, you don't care and you'll never care. Um, it's why everybody who's in this kind of stepping process goes to Apple and not Android, because Apple is subconsciously a more lucrative item. They do it with their advertisements. They do it with their stores. It's a motif. Most people don't understand what aesthetics are, let alone how the human psyche interacts with a lot of these subtle subliminal. Um, these are just a variety of things that affect you subliminally. Subliminal. I can't say words today. Subliminally. So it does. It comes down to having to understand that humanity, or at least by and large, right? Because this all started off console wars, and now I'm into like marketing schemes. But that's kind of the point. A variety of institutions, corporations, businesses, inventors, they will eventually find themselves where they lock themselves in, and they cannot break out of this paradigm, because they now have a vested interest in something because of a product they sell. And anytime that really happens, well, look at what happened to every single person who's ever tried to popularize the invention of a water car. They usually turn up dead, especially when they're trying to popularize it. There have been a variety of people who have built these vehicles themselves for personal use, and nothing happens to them. But it's when you start trying to shed a light on an entirely different way of doing things. So the console wars, very interesting. It was a very interesting thing to see happen at a time when, yeah, I don't know how to say it. At least for me, because that's what I saw. Everybody else was focused on Team A, Team B, Team C, Team D. I don't care. They're all options. If you step back from the situation and understand what is being offered to you, right? Nintendo understands this perfectly well, and it's why their dominance will never be questioned. because they understand the product that they have and they understand the services that it provides. PlayStation, on the other hand, popularized giving you free games, so they have that achievement under their belt for popularizing that thing. But beyond that, what they offer is a very tailored experience to enjoying your video games. Right? They also have the Japanese market behind their back. So, point aside, each of these companies understands what they're offering. Microsoft was late to that party because I'd imagine it's because they probably had no real, at least whoever was spearheading their project or spearheading the brand or the direction of the whatever you want to call that, you could tell that there was no real direction. It was just this corporate Americanism approach to trying to enter a marketing space. They did really well during the inception of the first Xbox, but towards the later end of the 360 and them trying to just look at marketing data and trying to just incorporate all these things, they completely flopped on their face. I'm not too sure what to say about modern consoles because I stopped caring. And if I do play, I only play on the PC, and that's primarily for the reason of I will not find myself investing in anything else besides something like a PC because it's a workhorse. It's something that you can, it's multi-faceted and multi-layered. There's also the fact that if you're really good with a computer and you get that tinkerer spirit, you'll drive yourself to learn more because a computer is a gateway, not to having your brain washed and now I'm a normie. It is a gateway to understanding of, how do I say this? The self-reliance aspect of YouTube. But that's really only a tailored experience for those who are seeking it. So not everybody is in that frame of reference. But that's what the internet is, and that's what computers are. It's a double-edged sword, and it's fucking sharp. Because if you're not careful with it, you know, you'd be wondering why it's in your foot or why you've chopped off one of your legs completely. But, you know, that's how reckless most Americans are handling their thing because it's all about instant gratification and understanding that they know you because you're human. They know you because we're creatures of habit. And it kind of falls into this cycle where, so like I said, where they find themselves in these positions of interest where now they want to be the lead horse in this race, but they also don't know how to move forward because it's a brand new emerging industry. And they also know that the cards are stacked against them when it comes down to, like, how much does it retain its value? How useful is it? Can I use it for anything else? And I think the only real player in the industry that actually tried attempting this understanding of the situation was PlayStation, because they were the only meaningful thing in the market that offered a Blu-ray DVD player and a console at the same time. Nobody else is doing that. And that's meaningful because at the time, Blu-ray players were at least the same price, or not sometimes even more, than a PlayStation. So you were better off buying a PlayStation and using that as a Blu-ray DVD, at least at the time when the PlayStation 3 came out. But again, it all comes down to some people, or at least some corporations, or whoever's the project lead, understands the market, understands themselves in reference to. So, what do you think, that when they became billionaires that they wouldn't have a vested interest in making sure that they wouldn't lose players towards the PC market? Well, you saw Nintendo double down with their aesthetic strategy. Nintendo offers a very specific kind of experience alongside PlayStation. These two players have understood the market and understand how to retain their dominance in this sphere. Microsoft, on the other hand, is just kind of playing off analytics. They play off the book. They play off of, no, we're going to go with this strategy because this is the strategy that might make us the most money. At least that's what I think. That's how I think these fucking people manage themselves, because some of their decisions make absolutely no fucking sense when you really think about them. At least Microsoft's proven themselves to be that way. Which is why I mentioned that I largely believe that the discussion of that shirt that I was wearing of PC Master Race became a thing, and that's why 60 frames a second became a talking point. 4K became a talking point. But by no means were they addressing the real issue, which was it fucking takes time to innovate certain chip processors to do certain things on much less hardware, let alone developing the process for manufacturing, this and that. But those talking points only work if these companies are actually doing research and development. And I can imagine that they do research and development, but a lot of this technology, like chipsets, NVIDIA, AMD, IBM, basically even the little black chips that you see on a motherboard, every single one of those little chips is subject to certain patents. So when it comes down to it, certain motherboard manufacturers, certain graphic card manufacturers who license out the contracting work for making these graphics, that's why you have a bunch of different brand graphics cards, is because they give up the license, you can manufacture it, da 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 da, et cetera, et cetera. Because the industry is in lockstep in a certain fashion, you can tell that the royalties, or however these contracts are written out, or however research and development is locked down, they have to abide by certain contract rules. I don't even know what to say about how I think that the CPU market space is being manipulated by, with each iteration of a new chip. You'd imagine that you'd see more innovation as cell phones get better, but you don't. And I find that rather interesting. As to why, I don't know. But there is a vested interest in making sure that the experience humanity has on every variety of platforms is maintained, tailored, and kept under the control of, at least my opinion, the people who make the most to profit from it. Who benefits, right? Who's the one making the money off of all this stuff? And now coming to the social commentary portion of it, if you are subject to having a favorite brand, you're a guppy. It doesn't matter. Even I, who have favorite brands in terms of ice cream, sodas, or anything, I have to understand that some of my opinions are biased because some of these things have been my favorite since I was a kid. But I always constantly remember the beratement that I would get from television commercials, or the association of what you saw in the commercial to association to other things. The famous example is Axe body spray, right? When the dude would spray Axe body spray on him, all the women would go crazy over him. Like, these corporations and these commercial companies, I don't know, marketing firms, they know what they're doing, and it's just a basic trick in the book, right? I think the very first people to do this were either Coca-Cola or Pepsi when they started putting women on pinups. And if it wasn't them, it was probably a tobacco company. But point is, as point stands, associations that happen on a subconscious level will determine the effects of the human subject. So if you live, eat, breathe, and shit, well, more than likely you're subject to any of these standards. It is what it is. But when you start understanding these from an introspective level, you start undoing them. And that's the point. You never learn human psychology. You never learn applicable human psychology in the sense of, how can I use the realm of understanding of my own emotions, my own state of mind, my own conclusions, and how do I reverse engineer them into understanding why certain decisions happen, into understanding why certain things happen. Which is kind of funny because what you're seeing now is with the way social interactions with people are happening is, you're having a lot of men ain't shit and you having a lot of women ain't shit. But between both sides, now I can't speak for everybody, but I'd imagine that there's always a percentage of these people that will never criticize themselves, both men and women. It's just what it is. So what I'm saying is, because there is a percentage of mental health in America because of either shitty parenting, shitty schooling, shitty understanding of self-discipline, you have a lot of people acting out of impulse, leaving. Where was I going to tie this into? This is console war stuff. I don't know. At the end of the day, I largely believe that there are control paradigms in the sense of you're made and designed to interpret the world in a certain way that is conditioned onto us by the way by the way we're schooled, right? Um, so American students develop different habits compared to Japanese students because they do different things at the school, right? At Japanese schools, they don't have janitors. It's the kids who clean up the schools. In America, everything's a commodity. There's somebody who does something for you at all levels, and the viewship of understanding that, right? You can imagine that a Japanese person who has to clean their classroom understands that there's a level of appreciation for something that you did because everybody else benefits from it, and they take turns. In America, um, well, just look at the behavior of people when they speak to cashiers, when they speak to people who are working these service jobs. It's not very kind and it's not very pretty. I'm not saying everybody does it, but I am saying that there is a level of it's like a callous, right? Like you've become so callous towards certain type of people that you've even demeaned the job that now nobody wants to even work that job or work that position because they're degraded. It's demeaning, and the value structure of what people value has shifted to, I don't know, what would it be now, right? Being a rapper, I guess, would be something of social class, of social value, of this and that, and people will say, well, that doesn't really matter. No, it does. It dictates people's behavior, and a lot of this is developed subconsciously through whatever form of media you're interpreting into yourself, which is kind of where I learned the term hyperrealism from, is because we watch certain TV shows, we watch movies, we do all these things, and we see all these things, and we associate the emotions that we feel while we're watching these scenes, and we naturally want to kind of cling on to that experience, and we'll want it for ourselves without really understanding the logic behind our behaviors, our actions, and how that will drive between the interaction between person A and person B, right? Without understanding that not everybody's perfect. Even if you did have this hyper realistic moment with somebody that you would consider perfect, you're unaccounting for their life experience. You're not really accounting for who that sort of individual is, what their past is. You've fantasized this, your interpretation of the person, and you've fantasized it to such a degree that, right, the moment that illusion breaks, right, between woman or man, when that illusion breaks on the behalf of the other person, it's a hyper realistic moment where you're like, whoa, this isn't right. This isn't something that I would consider my perfect person doing. I can't use my example as an excuse, as an analogy, not an excuse. But I used something between me and one of my exes as an excuse for me to break up with her. And it was the fact that she wanted to help her niece transition. And I was vehemently against it because that's something I'm not jiving with. That's an inversion. And instead of, like, right, because the way I saw it was, instead of coping with the real problem that she's experiencing, you're telling her that she should seek escapism through the denying of reality. And, instead, it wasn't the kid's fault. It was the mother's fault, because the mother was in a very terrible relationship where that daughter was exposed to some very nasty shit. But the way that social media is kind of portraying it is, oh, maybe, right, it's not the external factors, maybe it's you, maybe you should just change the way you are, and maybe things will be different, right, because now you're this, or now you're that, or now you're playing this imaginary game in your head and you're portraying yourself as something completely different. And I used that as an excuse to break up with her, and not a very good move. But in the long run, it was just kind of like, I had to understand that I've attached all these expectations, all these things, and I've wanted to perceive something in a certain way that I completely ignored a lot of other red flags up until where it became a point of me where I was like, nah, I can't stand this. I can't stand being a part of something I know won't end well. Um, all because this kid's mother is delusional. I these were like some of the beginning moments, right, when I was like, okay, I have no idea what's going on, but I don't like this, and I'm beginning to really resent a lot of things. But it was not funny. So I, yeah, constantly found myself in those situations where you're not right. You don't get what you're being told, and with the console war stuff, it's like, yeah, buy any of these 3 consoles and get locked down into any of our platforms, where we don't profit off of the console, but we profit off of all the CDs you buy. Meanwhile, completely ignoring that there was an online service called Steam Online where you could buy video games and not necessarily have a digital copy. And because of that, you can transfer account, buy new hardware, lose one computer, gain another one, but still have all your games. Now, yes, I understand you don't own the actual physical copy. Like, you're subject to Steam and their platform. What if their servers go offline? What if them as a company disappears? I completely understand that whole side of the argument. So don't fucking don't twist my words. I understand. But at the same time, that to me just sounds like a great talking point for a different industry. And it wouldn't be the first time any of these corporations or any of these hate activist groups gets their message spread out far faster than anybody else. And I mean, I also have to consider that there was that time when I think it was Vanilla WoW that popularized what happened to old video. It wasn't even them. It was like a whole bunch of other stuff. It was DLC packs. It was the season pass stuff. It was the blatant monetization of loot boxes, of this, like basically cash cowing you, or forcing you into situations where you would have to spend money. Da 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 da. You get my point. During that point, that's a fault of the industry. That's not a fault of Steam. Steam has offered a great service and a great platform, and I understand that if their servers go down, we lose everything. But we also have to subject the other side to the same argument. Currently, right now, who's offering the better offer is what people should be asking. But instead, it's kind of funny to say corporations and companies have locked down YouTubers or mouthpieces or talking heads to say their message, to defend their piece. And it fits into this identitarianism where it just becomes gobbledygook you repeat in order to create this firm belief in self. But in reality, you just got your talking point from somebody who has a vested interest in making sure he says something good because he wants to get invited to the parties and all the nice stuff. It gets crazy. I really need to not say so often. I was doing so great, but then I was like, I'm not going to say it. Right? I need to be more conscious about that. If I want to get good at public speaking, if you catch the drift. So I think I might end it there. I think I spoke my complete 50 minutes. I really doubt I'm going to make another video. I got way too much shit to fucking do. Art. Who would have fucking thought? Somebody who was shit at art all the way growing up is now doing art stuff. Right, all the things I thought I could never do, now I'm doing. And I'm kind of getting over a lot of the anxieties that I associate with, like, oh, maybe I should recheck that. Maybe I should redo it. So, console wars. I think I should just end it there. But again, it's an emerging industry. Of course, nobody knew what they were getting themselves into. Nobody could have really predicted that. Because the only time you can make predictions is when you have standards or markers in history in order for you to be like, oh, we knew the video game industry was going to blow up because of X, Y, or Z. Hell no. In reality, at least from what I remember, video games were never in a good light and are still not in a good light because they say procrastination, this, that, while completely ignoring that while they are right that they are a waste of time, but whose fault is that? Is that the manufacturers of the console, or is that the software developers, or is that the marketing tycoons, or is that the video game idea, or is it right? Because there's a variety of different kinds of video games. There's a variety of different kind of genres, and each genre has its own mental task to be worked with. So there's been no real exploration into seeing that if there have been any meaningful attempts into creating like a beneficial brain game. I know the Professor Layton series is really popular because it's a puzzle series. It always kind of puts you in a situation where you have to really think all the time. Um, Beyond that, you know, horror, mystery, no, not really. I don't even know. But you get my point. There is, at least the way I see it, there's been no meaningful progress or no meaningful attempt in these software developing companies in order to develop a video game that could benefit man, that could propel him forward towards a different, you know what I mean? Like, instead of looking at a shooter game and thinking that all the kid is learning is how to be destructive, well, is that why Counter-Strike didn't become popular throughout the world? Was because it wasn't about killing or murdering, but it was about teamwork, understanding layouts, understanding how to time something correctly with somebody else in order to execute movement onto a bomb site, cooperation. And then there was that whole thing where I remember that one of the I think it was a commentator in one of the events that said that the reason why Valve never thought that Counter-Strike was going to make it is because they used the terms explicitly counter-terrorist and terrorist, and that completely falls against the social paradigm of our understanding because it implies there is something counter to a terrorist, and that would implicate understanding what a terrorist is. And with the way we saw things develop from 2015 and onward, kind of makes sense why a game like Counter-Strike was never going to survive. So I'll leave that there. And